They threw me out at my own husband's funeral. You're no longer welcome in this house, Margaret. Pack your things and get out of our property. Those were the words my late husband's billionaire stepson spat in my face while funeral guests were still eating canapés in the next room. I was 62 years old, widowed for less than 48 hours. And I was being evicted from the home where I'd lived for 12 years. But he didn't know I'd spent the last 3 months preparing something very special. And when that sheriff knocked on the door with a sealed envelope, when the judge read those restraining order terms out loud, when the moving truck showed up, but not for me, his smug smile vanished like smoke. Let me tell you how a 62-year-old widow destroyed an entire family's plan to rob her blind. My name is Margaret Chen, and I need you to understand something right from the start. I wasn't always the woman who could stand up to a billionaire. 3 months before that funeral, I was just a widow in waiting, holding my husband Robert's hand in a private room at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, watching cancer steal him away one breath at a time. Robert was 68. We'd been married for 12 years, what they call a late-life marriage. I was his second wife. His first wife, Patricia, had died 20 years earlier, leaving him with a son from her first marriage, Brandon. Brandon Mitchell, tech mogul, founder of Mitchell Solutions, worth an estimated $2.3 billion according to Forbes. I need to be clear about this. Brandon wasn't Robert's biological son. Patricia had brought Brandon into her marriage with Robert when the boy was only 5 years old. Robert raised him, loved him, paid for Princeton, seeded his first startup. But blood. No shared blood. That detail matters. God, does it matter? I met Robert at a charity gala in Scottsdale, Arizona, back in 2011. I was 50, divorced for 3 years, working as an event planner. He was a widower, a retired aerospace engineer with kind eyes and terrible jokes. We danced to The Way You Look Tonight, and he stepped on my foot twice. I married him 8 months later at a small ceremony at the Phoenician Resort. Those 12 years were the happiest of my life. We had a beautiful home in Paradise Valley, right near Camelback Mountain. Robert was generous, thoughtful, and, this is important, he was smart about money. Aerospace engineers aren't billionaires, but Robert had done well. He'd made wise investments, had a solid portfolio, owned our home outright. We weren't rich like Brandon, but we were comfortable. Very comfortable. Brandon tolerated me. That's the kindest way to put it. At our wedding, he showed up late, stayed for 45 minutes, gave us a Crate and Barrel gift card. Over the years, he'd visit maybe 3 or 4 times annually, always with his wife Stephanie, a former model who looked at me like I was the help. They had 2 kids I barely knew. But the tolerance ended when Robert got sick. It was pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Diagnosed in February of that year. The doctors gave him 6 months. They were optimistic. He had 4. I'll never forget the morning Robert sat me down at our kitchen table, the Arizona sun streaming through the windows. His coffee getting cold in that University of Arizona mug he loved. "Maggie," he said. He always called me Maggie. "I need to tell you something about Brandon." I can still smell that coffee. Can still see the way his hand shook slightly as he reached across the table. "He's going to come after everything," Robert said. "The moment I'm gone, he's going to try to push you out." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Robert, he's a billionaire. What could he possibly want from? It's not about the money." Robert's voice was firm. "It's about control. It's about legacy. It's about the fact that you're not his mother, and in his mind, you don't deserve what's his." I remember feeling cold despite the heat outside. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I've already talked to my attorney, Daniel Reeves. He's the best estate lawyer in Arizona. We're going to make sure you're protected. But Maggie, you need to be smart. You need to be ready. Brandon is ruthless in business, and he won't be any different with family." That was April 15th. I remember because it was tax day and I'd just gotten off the phone with our accountant. Robert died on June 3rd, at 4:47 in the morning. I was holding his hand. His last words were, "Remember what we talked about. Don't let him bully you." Brandon showed up at the hospital at 8:30 a.m. I was still sitting in that chair, still holding Robert's cooling hand, when he walked in with Stephanie. "We'll handle the arrangements," was the first thing Brandon said. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "How are you holding up?" Just, "We'll handle the arrangements." I stood up slowly. My back ached from sitting all night. Robert and I already discussed his wishes. My father wanted a proper funeral, Brandon interrupted. At the country club. The Phoenician, where our family has been members for 35 years. "He wasn't your father," I said quietly. The air in that hospital room went arctic. Brandon stepped closer. He was tall, 6 feet 2 inches, with that particular brand of confidence that comes from never being told no. "Excuse me. Robert was your stepfather," I said. "And he wanted a simple service. The house. With close friends." Stephanie made a sound, something between a laugh and a scoff. "Oh, honey. That might have worked when he was alive and in love, but things are different now." I should have walked away. Should have let them have that moment. But grief makes you stupid and I was so tired. "Get out," I said. Brandon smiled. Actually smiled. "No, Margaret. You're going to get out. You've had 12 years in that house. 12 years playing dress-up as a Mitchell. But that ends now. My name is Chen. I kept my name." "Even better," Stephanie said. "Makes the paperwork simpler." They left, and I sat back down in that chair, still smelling the antiseptic and the death, and I realized Robert had been right about everything. The funeral was 3 days later. Brandon insisted on the country club. I insisted on our home. We compromised, his word not mine, on holding it at the house but with proper catering and setup, which Brandon would arrange and pay for. I should have known what that meant. The funeral was beautiful, I'll admit. Brandon spared no expense. There were at least 200 people. Robert's old colleagues from Honeywell, friends from the golf course, neighbors from Paradise Valley, even some distant cousins I'd never met. The catering was from Café Monarch. The flowers were stunning. I wore a simple black dress from Nordstrom and Robert's favorite necklace, a string of pearls he'd given me on our 5th anniversary. I greeted people, accepted condolences, held it together even when Mrs. Henderson from the HOA squeezed my hand and whispered, "He loved you so much, dear." Brandon gave a eulogy. It was eloquent. It was touching. It was about Patricia, his real mother, and about Robert's role in building the Mitchell legacy. My name was mentioned once. And of course Margaret, who made his final years comfortable. Comfortable. Like I was a hospice nurse. The reception was winding down. It was maybe 4 p.m. when Brandon pulled me aside. We were standing in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, near the powder room where I'd hung Robert's favorite photograph of Sedona. "We need to talk about the house," Brandon said. "Not today," I replied. "Please. Not today." "Yes, today." His voice wasn't loud, but it was hard. "Because today is when you need to start making arrangements." "Arrangements? To move out? I'm giving you 2 weeks. That's generous, considering." "Considering what?" Something hot was building in my chest. "This is my home, Brandon. This was my father's home. Now it's mine. Robert left it to me. In his will." Brandon laughed. Actually threw his head back and laughed. "Is that what you think? Oh, Margaret. That's adorable." Stephanie appeared then, as if summoned. She was holding a glass of Chardonnay from the bar setup in our dining room. "Let me explain how this works," Brandon said, and his voice had that particular tone men use when they're explaining things to women they consider stupid. "My father had assets. Substantial assets. And while you might have convinced him to scribble your name on some documents while he was sick and not thinking clearly, I have lawyers. Very good lawyers. And they've already started the process to contest any questionable changes to his estate plan. You can't do that. I'm doing it." He stepped closer. I could smell his cologne, something expensive and suffocating. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take the generous settlement my lawyers are preparing. Maybe 200,000, maybe 300,000 if you're pleasant about it. And you're going to move out of this house. And you're going to sign away any claims to the Mitchell assets. The Mitchell assets. Felt dizzy. Robert's name was Walker. Robert Walker. The assets built during his marriage to my mother. The investments, the properties, There are no other properties, I said. There's this house, there's a condo in San Diego we sold 4 years ago, That's not your concern anymore. Brandon's face was close to mine now. 2 weeks, Margaret. Pack your things. Take your costume jewelry and your romance novels and whatever else you brought into this marriage, and get out. And if I don't? His smile was the cruelest thing I'd ever seen. Then my lawyers will make sure you leave with nothing. And trust me, we'll drag this through probate court so long that you'll be broke just from legal fees before we even get to trial. Is that what you want? To spend whatever money you have fighting a billionaire? I stood there in the hallway of my own home at my husband's funeral, and I felt something break inside me. Not my spirit. My last thread of politeness. Get out of my house, I said. Excuse me. Get house. My voice was shaking, but it was loud enough that a few people in the living room turned to look. Brandon's jaw clenched. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was letting you through the door. Get out. Now. He left. They both left. But as he walked past me, he leaned in close and whispered, 2 weeks. And Margaret. I'd start packing tonight if I were you. You're going to need every day you can get. After everyone left, after the caterers cleaned up, after the house was empty and quiet and so achingly lonely I could barely breathe, I sat in Robert's study. His computer was still there. His files. His carefully organized folders marked estate planning, insurance, legal. And right there in a folder marked for Maggie, open immediately, was a video file. Clicked it. And Robert's face filled the screen. Hi, sweetheart, he said. And just hearing his voice made me sob. If you're watching this, I'm gone. And I'm so sorry to leave you. But I need you to listen carefully because I've prepared something. Daniel Reeves has all the documents. Call him tomorrow. Don't wait. Brandon is going to come at you hard and fast. And you need to be ready. The video was 8 minutes long. When it ended, I sat in that chair for another hour. And then I did something I hadn't done in 3 months. Smiled. Because Robert hadn't just prepared documents. He'd prepared a nuclear bomb. And he'd handed me the detonator. But they didn't know that yet. Brandon and Stephanie drove away that night thinking they'd won. Thinking I was just some scared widow who'd roll over. They had no idea what was coming. No idea what Robert and I had spent those final 3 months building. But I still wasn't sure I had the strength to do it. To fight back against a billionaire and his army of lawyers. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't discover until Daniel Reeves called me the next morning, was that I wouldn't be fighting alone. And that Brandon's cruelty that night. That was just his opening act. The real show, the humiliation, the threats, the escalating attacks, that was about to begin. But they didn't know what I had hidden. What Robert had hidden. What we'd spent his last precious months preparing, knowing this exact moment would come. Would you believe me if I told you it got worse? So much worse that I actually started to doubt everything Robert had told me. Because here's what I didn't mention yet. The safe deposit box at Chase Bank that I didn't even know existed. And what Brandon found when he broke into it. The morning after the funeral, I woke up at 6 a.m. Couldn't sleep anymore. The house felt too big, too empty, too full of Robert's absence. I made coffee in the Keurig, breakfast blend the pods Robert liked, and sat at the kitchen island staring at my phone. Daniel Reeves had emailed me at 11:47 p.m. the night before. Subject line: Urgent. Call me ASAP, Robert's estate. I called at 8 a.m. sharp, the moment I figured a lawyer's office might be open. Margaret. Daniel's voice was warm but urgent. I'm so glad you called. Are you somewhere private? I'm at home. Alone. Good. Keep it that way. Don't let Brandon or Stephanie into that house. Not without witnesses. Not without your own attorney present. Do you understand? Daniel, what's going on? What's going on is that Robert spent the last 3 months of his life making sure you'd be protected. But he also knew Brandon would fight dirty. And we need to move fast. He explained. Robert had updated his will 6 weeks before his death. Everything, the house, his investment accounts, his life insurance, his vintage car collection, everything, went to me. Brandon was explicitly excluded except for a token bequest of $10,000. In recognition of our years as family. That's going to make him furious, I said. That's the point. Robert knew Brandon would contest the will. He was counting on it. Why would he want? Because when Brandon contests it, he has to provide evidence that Robert was mentally incompetent or unduly influenced. And Margaret, Robert documented everything. Every doctor's visit showing he was lucid and competent. Every conversation with financial advisors. Every decision was witnessed and notarized. Brandon's going to spend millions in legal fees just to prove what we already know. Robert knew exactly what he was doing. I felt something unclench in my chest. So I'm protected. You're protected by the will. But that doesn't mean Brandon can't make your life hell while the estate is in probate. That's why Robert set up something else. Something Brandon doesn't know about yet. What? A living trust. Robert transferred the house into it 2 months ago. It's not part of the estate. It's not subject to probate. As of the day he died, that house legally belongs to you, free and clear. Brandon can't touch it. I set down my coffee cup before I dropped it. He doesn't know. Not yet. But he will when his lawyers do their research. Which is why I need you to come to my office today. We need to file some paperwork, establish clear legal ownership and, he paused, discuss the restraining order. What restraining order? The one Robert prepared. In case Brandon got threatening. Did he threaten you yesterday, Margaret? I thought about Brandon's words. I'd start packing tonight if I were you. Yes, I said. He gave me 2 weeks to move out. Perfect. Daniel's voice was almost cheerful. Bring documentation. Text messages, emails, any witnesses who heard him. We're going to bury him in paperwork. I went to Daniel's office that afternoon. It was in Scottsdale, in one of those modern buildings with too much glass and motivational quotes in the lobby. Daniel was 55, with silver hair and the kind of calm competence that made you feel safe. He had me sign documents. So many documents. Then he showed me the trust paperwork. Robert's signature, dated April 28th, witnessed by Daniel and a notary public named Sarah Chen, no relation. He really did this, I whispered. He loved you, Daniel said simply. And he knew his stepson. Now about the restraining order. We spent 2 hours going over Arizona's restraining order laws. In Arizona, you can file for an order of protection if someone threatens you, harasses you, or makes you fear for your safety. The standard was surprisingly low. You just had to show evidence that a reasonable person would feel threatened. Brandon's words, "My lawyers will make sure you leave with nothing. You'll be broke just from legal fees," qualified as harassment and intimidation. But he's not threatening physical violence, I said. Doesn't matter. Economic threats, intimidation, trying to force you out of your legal residence. It all counts. Arizona takes financial abuse of vulnerable adults seriously. And Margaret, legally, as a recent widow, you're considered vulnerable. I hated that word. Vulnerable. But I was also smart enough to use it. We filed the paperwork that day. A petition for an order of protection against Brandon Mitchell, citing harassment, intimidation, and threats to my financial security and housing. The court date was set for 10 days out, June 14th. But we also filed for a temporary emergency order, which a judge could grant within 24 hours if the threat was deemed immediate. I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Powerful. That feeling lasted exactly 3 hours. At 7 p.m. my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 people I didn't recognize. A man in a suit and a woman with a clipboard. I opened the door with the chain lock still engaged. "Can I help you?" "Margaret Chen," the woman asked. Yes. You've been served. She shoved papers through the gap. Have a nice evening. They were gone before I could respond. I closed the door, hands shaking, and looked at the documents. Petition to contest will. Petition for emergency injunction. Motion to freeze estate assets. Brandon's lawyers had filed their paperwork too. And they were asking a judge to freeze everything. Bank accounts, investment accounts, even the house, until the will could be properly investigated for signs of fraud and undue influence. Called Daniel immediately. I expected this, he said. Don't panic. They're trying to scare you. The house is in the trust, remember. They can't touch it. And the judge isn't going to freeze your access to basic living expenses. But they're claiming Robert was mentally incompetent. That I manipulated him. Let them claim it. We have medical records proving otherwise. Margaret, this is what Robert prepared for. This is why we have documentation. What do I do? You sit tight. You document every contact with Brandon or his lawyers. You don't engage. And you wait for our court date. In 10 days, we're going to get that restraining order. And Brandon won't be able to come within 500 feet of you or your home. 10 days. Could handle 10 days. I couldn't handle 10 days. Day 2. I went to Costco to stock up on groceries. Grief makes you forget to eat, and I'd been surviving on crackers and cheese. As I was loading cases of LaCroix into my SUV, I saw Stephanie. She was getting out of a Tesla in the parking lot, wearing Lululemon and oversized sunglasses. She saw me, walked directly toward me. Margaret. Stephanie. You know you can't win this. Her voice was pleasant, conversational, like we were discussing the weather. Brandon has the best lawyers in Arizona. You're going to spend every penny Robert left you just fighting for the right to spend it. The house is mine, I said. Legally mine. For now. But houses need maintenance. Property taxes need to be paid. Utilities. Insurance. And once Brandon freezes the estate accounts, and he will, where do you think that money is coming from? I hadn't thought of that. The trust owned the house, but Robert's liquid assets, his checking account, his money market funds, those were still in probate. I have my own money, I said. Do you? She smiled. Because from what I understand, you quit your job when you married Robert. You've been a housewife for 12 years. How much could you have saved? She walked away, leaving me standing there in the Costco parking lot, hands gripping the shopping cart, doing math in my head. My savings account, $43,000. My retirement account, $87,000, but with penalties if I withdrew early. Robert had been paying for everything, the HOA fees, the property taxes, the insurance. Those bills were auto-paid from his accounts, which would be frozen any day now. Day 4. The estate accounts were frozen. I got a notice from Chase Bank informing me that, due to ongoing legal proceedings, all accounts associated with Robert Walker's estate were temporarily inaccessible pending court order. The property tax bill was due in 2 weeks. $8,400. HOA fee. $450 monthly. Homeowner's insurance. $2,100 quarterly, due next month. I could cover it. Barely. But Stephanie was right. If this dragged on, I'd burn through my savings just keeping the lights on. Day 5. Someone leaked the will contest to the Arizona Republic. The story ran on page B6. Tech billionaire Brandon Mitchell contests stepfather's will, claims widow manipulated dying man. My phone rang off the hook. Reporters wanting comments. Old friends from the event planning days calling to ask if it was true. My sister in Portland calling to ask if I needed money. I didn't answer any of them. Daniel had told me no comments, no interviews, no social media posts. Let Brandon make the mistakes, he'd said. Day 6. I ran into Mrs. Henderson at Starbucks on Camelback Road. She hugged me, then whispered, I heard what Brandon is saying about you. Don't you worry, dear. Everyone knows what kind of woman you are. What is he saying? Yes. She looked uncomfortable. Just rumors. About gold digging. About Well, about why Robert really married you. I drove home and cried for the first time since the funeral. Day 7. A Mercedes SUV pulled up in front of my house at 9 p.m. Brandon got out. I watched through the window as he walked to the mailbox, opened it and took out my mail. Mail. From my mailbox. I ran outside. What are you doing? He turned, holding a stack of envelopes. Looking for estate documents. As the executor. You're not the executor. I am. That's disputed. Put my mail back. He smiled. Set the envelopes on top of the mailbox. I don't need them anyway. I already know what I need to know. He walked back to his car, then turned. Nice garden, by the way. Be a shame if the HOA cited you for lack of maintenance. I hear they're very strict in Paradise Valley. He drove away. I grabbed my mail and ran inside. Hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. That's when I realized. He was trying to provoke me. Trying to make me do something stupid. Something his lawyers could use to prove I was unstable or aggressive. Called Daniel again. Document it, he said. Video if you can. We'll add it to the restraining order petition. Margaret, he's scared. This is what scared bullies do. They escalate. I don't know if I can do this, I whispered. Yes, you can. Because in 3 days we go to court. And we're going to make sure he can never pull this shit again. Day 8. I woke up to find my tires slashed. All 4 of them. On my Acura MDX. Parked in my own driveway. Called the police. They came, took a report, said there was no evidence who did it. The officer, a young guy, maybe 30, looked sympathetic but helpless. Do you have security cameras? He asked. No. Any idea who might have done this? I thought about Brandon's visit. About Stephanie's threats. About the fact that this happened the night after Brandon had been at my house. No, I said. Because I couldn't prove it. And accusing a billionaire without proof was a great way to get sued. The tires cost $840 to replace. The mobile service from Discount Tire came out that afternoon. Day 9. I got an email from the Paradise Valley HOA. Subject: Violation notice. Someone had complained that my landscaping was not in compliance with community standards. The grass was apparently too long. The bougainvillea needed trimming. I had 10 days to fix it or face a $500 fine. The grass was fine. The bougainvillea was fine. Robert and I had used the same landscaping service, Desert Oasis Landscaping, for 8 years. They came every Wednesday. Called them. They'd been told their services were no longer needed. By Brandon Mitchell, who claimed to be managing the property during the estate transition. I hired them back on the spot. Paid $350 for an emergency service call. Day 10, court day. I wore a navy blue suit from Talbot's and pearl earrings. Daniel met me at the Maricopa County Courthouse at 8:30 a.m. Ready? He asked. No, I said honestly. Good. Confidence is suspicious. Nervousness is human. Just tell the truth. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Patricia Holloway presided, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. Brandon was there with his lawyers. 3 of them from Keller and Ross, one of Phoenix's biggest firms. Brandon wore a Tom Ford suit and looked utterly unconcerned. Our hearing was at 9 a.m. Daniel presented our case. The threats, the harassment, Brandon entering my property, taking my mail, the tire slashing, circumstantial but part of a pattern, the HOA complaints. Testified. Told the judge exactly what Brandon had said at the funeral. Showed her the emails from his lawyers threatening to bankrupt me with legal fees. Explained how my estate accounts had been frozen. How I was being forced to drain my savings just to maintain the property that was legally mine. Brandon's lawyer, a man named Richard Keller with silver hair and a $5,000 suit, cross-examined me. Mrs. Chen, isn't it true that you married Robert Walker when he was a widower with substantial assets? I married Robert because I loved him. After knowing him how long? 8 months. And isn't it true that you encouraged him to update his will shortly after his cancer diagnosis? I didn't encourage anything. Robert made his own decisions. Decisions that coincidentally left you with everything and his stepson, the man who Robert raised as his own son, with virtually nothing? Brandon isn't Robert's son. Robert's will reflected his wishes. Or your manipulation. Daniel stood. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is litigating the will contest in a hearing about a restraining order. Judge Holloway looked at Keller. Sustained. Mr. Keller, keep it relevant. But the damage was done. Keller had planted the seed. Gold digger, manipulator, con artist. Then it was Brandon's turn to testify. He was smooth. Explained that he was simply trying to honor his father's legacy and protect family assets from potential fraud. He claimed he'd never threatened me, that our conversation at the funeral was a private discussion about reasonable timelines for transition. And the mail? Daniel asked. You admit you took Mrs. Chen's mail from her mailbox. I was looking for estate documents that legally should be disclosed to all interested parties. By stealing mail. That's a federal crime, Mr. Mitchell. I didn't steal anything. I looked and returned it. After Mrs. Chen confronted you. Brandon smiled. After I determined the documents weren't there. Judge Holloway called a 15-minute recess. Daniel and I sat on a bench outside the courtroom. How do you think it's going? He asked. Hard to say. Holloway is tough but fair. Brandon's lawyers are good, but they can't erase his behavior. When we returned, Judge Holloway had made her decision. I'm granting a temporary order of protection, she said. Mr. Mitchell, you are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Mrs. Chen or her residence. You are prohibited from contacting her directly or through third parties. You are prohibited from interfering with her property, including hiring or firing service providers for that property. This order is in effect for 1 year, subject to review. I felt my knees buckle with relief. However, the judge continued, this does not prejudge the will contest or any estate matters. Those will be handled in probate court. This order solely addresses the harassment and intimidation issues. Brandon's face was stone. But as we left the courtroom, I saw it. A flash of rage, quickly controlled. In the parking garage, Daniel hugged me. You did it. You're protected now. For a year, I said. What happens after that? After that, the will contest will be resolved. And Margaret, we're going to win. Robert made sure of it. I drove home on my new tires. And for the first time in 10 days I felt like I could breathe. But then I checked my email and saw a message from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line. You made a mistake. The email was short. That restraining order was cute. But you have no idea what you've started. Brandon isn't your only problem. There are things you don't know about Robert. Things that are going to come out. Things that will make you wish you'd taken the settlement. Tick-tock, Margaret. It wasn't signed. The email address was a random Gmail. truthteller2887@gmail.com. Called Daniel immediately. Forward it to me, he said. Don't respond. It's probably Brandon or someone working for him, trying to intimidate you. What if it's not? What if there really is something about Robert the first don't know? Like what? Margaret, I handled Robert's estate planning. I knew him for 15 years. If there were skeletons, I'd know about them. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that email. About what secrets Robert might have kept. About why Brandon was so certain he could win. And about the safe deposit box I'd found mentioned in Robert's files. The one at Chase Bank, box number 847, that I didn't have a key to. The next morning I went to Chase Bank on Tatum Boulevard. I need to access my husband's safe deposit box, I told the manager, a woman named Lisa with sympathetic eyes. I'm so sorry for your loss. Do you have the key? No, but I'm the executor of his estate. I showed her the trust documents, the death certificate, my ID. She looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen, I'm sorry, but that box was accessed 2 days ago. By Brandon Mitchell. He had power of attorney documents authorizing him to. What? My voice came out louder than I intended. He doesn't have power of attorney. I do. He presented documents from. She checked her computer. From Keller and Ross, dated April 10th. A durable power of attorney signed by Robert Walker, giving Brandon Mitchell full authority to access all bank accounts and safe deposit boxes in the event of death or incapacitation. April 10th. 6 weeks before Robert died. 3 weeks after Robert had told me about Brandon's threat. That's impossible, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't impossible. It was exactly the kind of thing Brandon would do. Forge documents, present them to a bank employee who had no reason to question a billionaire with expensive lawyers. Can you tell me what was in the box? Yes. Lisa looked even more uncomfortable. I'm not supposed to. But since you're listed as the executor, the box was empty when Mr. Mitchell left. He took everything. I drove home in a daze. Called Daniel from the car. That's forgery, he said. That's bank fraud. Margaret, this is good for us. This proves he's desperate. But what if there was something in that box? Something Robert wanted me to have. Then we'll get it back. I'll file a motion tomorrow demanding Brandon return all contents from that safe deposit box. He'll have to comply or face contempt charges. And if he already destroyed whatever was in there. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Let's not assume the worst yet. But I was assuming the worst. Because that email had been right. I didn't know what I'd started. I didn't know what Robert had kept in that box. And I was about to find out that Brandon's visit to the bank was just the beginning of something much bigger. But here's the thing about billionaires with something to hide. They get sloppy when they're scared. And Brandon made a mistake. Big one. He didn't know that Chase Bank has security cameras. Or that I had a friend who worked in their corporate security department. Want to know what those cameras caught him putting in his briefcase? That friend was Linda Matsuda. We'd worked together back in my event planning days. She'd been in charge of security for corporate events, and we'd stayed in touch. Christmas cards, occasional lunches, the kind of friendship that survives distance because the foundation is solid. I called her that afternoon, sitting in Robert's study, staring at his empty chair. Linda, I need a favor. And it's probably going to get complicated. Margaret, I heard about Robert. I'm so sorry. What do you need? I explained the situation. The safe deposit box, Brandon's fake power of attorney, the fact that he'd cleaned it out. The banks have security footage, Linda said slowly. But getting access to it without a subpoena. I'm not asking you to break any rules. I just need to know if it's possible. If there's footage. If it shows what he took. She was quiet for a long moment. Let me make some calls. No promises. 3 days later she called me back. I can't get you the footage, she said. But I can tell you what I heard through the grapevine. Brandon Mitchell accessed box 847 on June 12 at 2:47 p.m. He was in the vault for approximately 12 minutes. When he left, he was carrying a leather document folder and what witnesses described as a stack of papers about 2 inches thick. One employee noticed because he seemed nervous. Kept looking around like he was worried about being watched. That's it. Just papers. That's what they saw. But Margaret, if those papers were important enough for Robert to keep in a safe deposit box, and important enough for Brandon to forge documents to get them, you need to find out what they were. The probate hearing for Brandon's motion to return the contents was scheduled for June 28, 2 weeks away. Daniel filed an emergency motion for a restraining order on the safe deposit box contents, but the judge denied it. Without evidence of what was taken, Judge Martin said, I can't order its return. At 22. We couldn't prove what was taken without seeing it, and we couldn't see it without proof it existed. But then something unexpected happened. Something that changed everything. On June 20th, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Arizona area code, but not one I knew. Mrs. Chen. The voice was female, young, nervous. Yes. My name is Ashley Morrison. I'm I was Robert Walker's physical therapist. At the cancer center. I remembered her vaguely. A young woman, maybe 28, who'd helped Robert with exercises to maintain his strength during chemo. Ashley, hello. What can I do for you? I need to talk to you. In person. It's about Robert. And Brandon. And I think I might have done something really stupid. We met at a Starbucks on Shea Boulevard. Ashley was petite, with dark hair in a ponytail and worried eyes. She ordered a venti iced coffee and couldn't seem to sit still. I didn't know it was wrong, she said before I could even ask. Brandon said he was Robert's son, that he was helping manage his father's affairs, that it was all legal. What was legal? He asked me to witness a document. Back in April. He said Robert had signed a power of attorney, but it needed a witness signature, and could I help? He offered me $500. I'm drowning in student loans, and $500 is. I said yes. My stomach dropped. You witnessed the power of attorney Brandon used to access the safe deposit box. I don't know what he used it for. I just signed the witness line. He told me it was standard estate planning stuff. Her eyes filled with tears. But then I saw the news article about the will contest, and I looked up power of attorney documents online, and the one I signed, Mrs. Chen, it was backdated. It said April 10th, but I didn't sign it until April 23rd. And Robert wasn't even there. Robert wasn't present when you witnessed his signature? No. Brandon said he'd already signed it at home, that he just needed the witness signature for the bank. But that's not how it works, is it? The witness is supposed to watch the person sign. No, Ashley. That's not how it works. That's fraud. She started crying. Full-on sobbing in the middle of Starbucks. I'm going to lose my license. I'm going to get arrested. I was just trying to pay off my loans and... Ashley. I reached across the table and grabbed her hand. You're going to be fine. But I need you to do something. I need you to tell this exact story to my lawyer. And I need you to sign an affidavit. Will I get in trouble? Probably. But a lot less trouble than if you stay quiet. Brandon committed fraud. You were duped. There's a difference. She wiped her eyes. He's a billionaire. He'll destroy me. Only if you let him. I squeezed her hand. Ashley, Robert was a good man. He wouldn't want Brandon to get away with this. Help me make sure he doesn't. She signed the affidavit 2 days later in Daniel's office. A sworn statement that Brandon Mitchell had paid her $500 to witness a backdated power of attorney document that Robert Walker had never signed in her presence. This is gold, Daniel said after Ashley left. This invalidates the power of attorney. Which means everything Brandon took from that safe deposit box was taken illegally. We can file criminal charges. Will we? Let's use it as leverage first. I'll send this to Keller with a simple message. Return the contents of the box, or we go to the DA. The response came within 3 hours. Not from Keller. From Brandon directly to my personal email. You want to play hardball, Margaret? Fine. Let's play. I have copies of everything from that box. And trust me, you don't want this going public. Call me. He included his cell number. Called Daniel instead. Don't call him, Daniel said. This is a bluff. If he had anything damaging, he'd have used it already. What if it's not a bluff? What if Robert really did have secrets? Then we deal with them. But we don't negotiate with someone who just committed fraud. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Robert, about the man I'd married, about whether I'd really known him at all. What could be in those documents that Brandon thought would destroy me? At 2 a.m. my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Margaret, it's Brandon. His voice was different. Not angry, not smug. Tired. Almost human. We need to talk. My lawyer said. Screw the lawyers. Just you and me. I'll come to you. Tomorrow morning. Neutral Ground, that coffee shop on Lincoln. 9 a.m. Why? Because you're right about the power of attorney. And I'm right about what's in those documents. And we both have enough to destroy each other. So maybe we can find a way out of this that doesn't end with both of us in the gutter. He hung up before I could respond. I called Daniel at 7 a.m. Don't go, he said immediately. He sounded different. Scared maybe. Good. Keep him scared. Margaret, the moment you meet with him without counsel, you're vulnerable. He could record you, twist your words, claim you admitted something. Or I could find out what Robert was hiding. At what cost? I went anyway. Told Daniel I was going. Wore my Apple Watch set to record audio. Legal in Arizona as long as one party consents, and I was consenting to my own recording. Brandon was already there when I arrived at Press Coffee on Lincoln. He looked terrible, circles under his eyes, stubble on his jaw. His usual polished appearance replaced by a rumpled polo shirt and jeans. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "You have 5 minutes." He slid a manila folder across the table. "That's why Robert put me in his will originally. Before you opened it." Inside were bank statements. From an account in the Cayman Islands. In Robert Walker's name. With deposits dating back 15 years. Regular deposits of $50,000, sometimes $100,000, from a company called Hexagon Solutions, LLC. "I don't understand," I said. Robert was taking kickbacks. From Honeywell. He was the senior procurement officer for aerospace contracts. And Hexagon was a shell company created by one of Honeywell's suppliers. Every time Robert approved a contract, he got a percentage. Over 15 years, he skimmed almost $8 million. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. That's not possible. It's not only possible, it's documented. That offshore account still has $3.2 million in it. And Margaret, if this goes public, if the will contest goes to trial and this gets entered as evidence, Robert's reputation is destroyed. His legacy at Honeywell is destroyed. And you, as his widow and the executor of his estate, become legally responsible for returning that money. With penalties and interest. You're lying. I'm not. His voice was gentle, almost kind. Look at the dates. Look at the deposits. My lawyers have been through this. It's real. I looked at the statements again. The account was opened in 2001. Regular deposits through 2016, the year Robert retired from Honeywell. Why would Robert do this? Because Patricia was sick. Because medical bills for cancer are astronomical even with insurance. Because he was desperate and someone offered him a way out. Brandon leaned forward. "I'm not the villain here, Margaret. I'm trying to protect my father's memory. If this gets out, his name becomes synonymous with corporate fraud. His friends, your friends, everyone who respected him will know he was a criminal. And you'll use this to contest the will. I'll use it to show that Robert had hidden assets he didn't disclose. Assets that should be part of the estate. And yes, that calls into question the validity of the trust, the will, all of it." Felt sick. "What do you want?" "The same thing I wanted 2 weeks ago. You take a settlement. A fair one. $500,000. You sign away any claims to Robert's assets, including that offshore account. I quietly return the money to Honeywell, claim we discovered an accounting error, and Robert's reputation stays intact. And if I don't, then this goes to trial. The media will have a field day. Respected aerospace engineer caught in kickback scandal. Your husband becomes a cautionary tale. And you get nothing because every penny will go to fines and restitution." I stood up. "I need time. You have 48 hours. After that, my lawyers file the amended contest with this evidence attached." I walked out of that coffee shop and sat in my car for 20 minutes, hands shaking, trying to process what I'd just learned. Robert had been a criminal. The man I loved, the man who'd held my hand and made terrible jokes and slow danced with me in the kitchen. He'd stolen millions of dollars. Or had he? Because something was bothering me about those bank statements. Something about the dates. Something about... I drove straight to Daniel's office. Burst in without an appointment. He showed me bank statements, I said, spreading them on Daniel's desk. Offshore accounts. Kickbacks from Honeywell. $8 million over 15 years. Daniel studied them, his face grave. Then he picked up his phone. Sarah, cancel my 11 o'clock. And get me Harold Brennan at Honeywell Aerospace on the line. Who's Harold Brennan? Asked. Robert's old boss. If these kickbacks were real, Harold would know. Procurement doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are audits, reviews, oversight committees. Harold Brennan called back within an hour. Daniel put him on speaker. Daniel, good to hear from you. I was so sorry to hear about Robert. Harold, I need to ask you something sensitive. Did Robert ever have any issues with ethics violations? Any investigations into his procurement decisions? Robert. No. He was the most by-the-book officer I ever worked with. Why? What about a company called Hexagon Solutions? Never heard of it. Is this related to the will contest? I saw the news. It might be. Harold, if Robert had been taking kickbacks, what would the paper trail look like? There'd be internal audit flags, contract reviews, probably an investigation by corporate security. Robert signed off on millions in contracts over his career, but every single one went through at least 3 levels of approval. One person couldn't manipulate the system alone. Daniel and I looked at each other. Harold, thank you. This is very helpful. After he hung up, I said, the statements are fake. Or the kickbacks happened in a way that wouldn't trigger Honeywell systems. But that's not the point. Daniel was smiling. The point is that Brandon just committed another crime. He showed you forged documents to coerce you into a settlement. That's extortion. How do we prove they're forged? We subpoena the bank. Cayman banks cooperate with U.S. law enforcement in fraud cases. We get the real records, or prove the account doesn't exist. Either way, Brandon's in serious trouble. He said I have 48 hours. Then we have 48 hours to take him down first. But then, in what would turn out to be the strangest twist in this entire nightmare, my doorbell rang at 8 p.m. that night. I looked through the peephole. It was Stephanie, alone, crying. Against every instinct, I opened the door. Margaret, please. I need to talk to you. Brandon doesn't know I'm here. You have 2 minutes. She stepped inside, mascara running down her face, shaking. He's going to kill me if he finds out I'm here. But I can't. I can't be part of this anymore. Part of what? The bank statements are fake. Brandon had them created by some offshore document company. The account doesn't exist. He's been lying about everything. I felt the world tilt. Why are you telling me this? Because he's not going to stop. He's going to keep escalating. And I found something. She pulled out her phone. I found texts between him and someone named Marcus Chen. Do you know who that is? My blood went cold. That's my ex-husband. Brandon's been paying him $10,000 last month. Another $10,000 this week. For information about you. About your finances. About things you said during your marriage. She showed me the screenshots. Text messages from Brandon. Need everything you have on Margaret's spending habits. Any affairs. Any debts. Anything I can use. And Marcus's responses. She was always a gold digger. Married me for my money too. Then left when she found a better deal. I hadn't thought about Marcus in 10 years. We'd divorced in 2008 after a 5-year marriage that had been a mistake from the start. He was a software developer who'd made money in the dot-com boom and never let me forget it. Why is Brandon doing this? Yes. Because it's not about the money. Stephanie's voice broke. It's about winning. It's about control. It's about the fact that Robert chose you over him, and he can't stand it. And I'm tired of being married to a man who destroys people for sport. Are you leaving him? I don't know. Maybe. But I needed you to know the truth. Brandon is planning to release those fake bank statements to the media tomorrow if you don't settle. He's going to destroy Robert's reputation even though he knows it's all lies. Why would he? Because once it's out there, it doesn't matter if it's true. The stain remains. And you'll spend years fighting it, even after you prove it's fake. She left after that. Drove away in her Tesla, leaving me standing in my foyer with more questions than answers. Called Daniel immediately. Told him everything. We need to move now, he said. Tonight. I'm filing an emergency motion with everything we have. The forged power of attorney, Ashley's affidavit, the fake bank statements, Stephanie's testimony. And we're asking for a restraining order that prevents Brandon from releasing any information about Robert or you to the media. Will it work? It has to. Because if Brandon releases those statements, true or not, your life becomes hell. That night I didn't sleep at all. I sat in Robert's study, looking at his photos on the wall. Robert at Honeywell, receiving an award for excellence. Robert on our wedding day. Robert laughing at some joke I'd made. Had I known him? Really known him? Or had I been so blinded by love that I'd missed the signs? And then I saw it. In one of the photos, Robert at his retirement party, there was a banner in the background. Thank you for 30 years of integrity and excellence. 30 years. The bank statements Brandon showed me started in 2001. That would have been Robert's 24th year at Honeywell. I pulled out the statements again, really studied them this time. The first deposit was dated March 15, 2001. $50,000 from Hexagon Solutions, LLC. I opened Robert's laptop. I still had his password and searched his email. Found his Honeywell calendar from 2001. March 15, 2001. Robert was on vacation. In Hawaii. With Patricia. For their 25th anniversary. He couldn't have approved a contract or received a kickback that day. He was on a beach in Maui. I checked the next deposit date. June 8, 2001. Robert's calendar. Medical leave. Patricia's surgery. Every single deposit date. I cross-referenced with Robert's calendar. And every single time, Robert was either on vacation, on medical leave, or attending a conference in a different state. The bank statements weren't just fake. They were lazy fakes. Brandon hadn't even bothered to check Robert's actual schedule. At 6 a.m., I emailed Daniel everything I'd found. At 9 a.m. we filed our emergency motion. 2 p.m. we got our hearing. Judge Holloway looked exhausted. Counselors, I've reviewed the filings. Mr. Keller, your client has some serious explaining to do. Brandon was there looking furious. Stephanie was not. Your Honor, Keller began, my client. Your client presented forged documents to Mrs. Chen in an attempt to coerce a settlement. Your client paid a witness to sign a backdated power of attorney. Your client accessed a safe deposit box using fraudulent documents. And now I'm seeing evidence that your client attempted to manufacture evidence of criminal activity to defame a deceased man. Mr. Keller, does your firm want to be associated with this? Keller looked at Brandon, then back at the judge. Your Honor, I request a recess to consult with my client. Denied. You've had weeks to consult. Mr. Mitchell, stand up. Brandon stood. Mr. Mitchell, I'm granting Mrs. Chen's motion in its entirety. You are prohibited from releasing any information about Robert Walker or Margaret Chen to any media outlet. You are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Chen's ex-husband or any other third parties to obtain information about her. And I'm referring this matter to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for investigation into possible fraud and extortion charges. Do you understand? Brandon's face was white. Your Honor, do you understand? Yes. Good. And Mr. Keller, you have 24 hours to return every document taken from that safe deposit box to Mrs. Chen's attorney, or your firm will be sanctioned. We're done here. As we left the courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Daniel was grinning. We did it, he said. Did we? Yes. Brandon still contests the will. This isn't over. No, but we broke his back. He's exposed. His lawyers are going to drop him. Keller and Ross doesn't take fraud cases. And without those fake bank statements, he has no evidence of undue influence. In the parking garage, Daniel's phone rang. He answered, listened, then hung up with a strange expression. That was Richard Keller. He wants to meet. Off the record. Tonight. Why? Because Brandon isn't his only problem. And apparently, there's something in those safe deposit box documents that changes everything. What Keller told us that night made me realize I'd been fighting the wrong battle. Brandon wasn't trying to steal my inheritance. He was trying to hide a secret. A secret that, if it got out, would destroy his entire empire. And Robert had known about it all along. Want to know what a billionaire is willing to do to bury the truth? We met Keller at Durant's, an old-school steakhouse in downtown Phoenix. The kind of place where deals get made in red leather booths and nobody asks questions. Keller was already there, nursing a scotch. He looked 10 years older than he had in court that afternoon. "Thank you for coming," he said as we slid into the booth. "You have 30 minutes, Daniel replied. "And I'm recording this. I expect nothing less." Keller pushed a folder across the table. "That's everything from the safe deposit box. All of it. I'm returning it against my client's wishes because I'm not going to prison for Brandon Mitchell." I opened the folder. Inside were dozens of documents. Contracts, emails, financial statements, and, "Oh my God," I whispered. "Keep reading," Keller said grimly. The first document was an audit report from the SEC. Dated 2018. Subject: Mitchell Solutions LLC. Preliminary investigation into securities fraud. The report detailed a scheme where Brandon's company had inflated user numbers to secure a $400 million investment round. Fake accounts, bought traffic, manipulated metrics. Classic tech fraud. "This was never made public," Keller said. Brandon settled with the SEC quietly, paid a $15 million fine, agreed to independent oversight, signed an NDA. "How did Robert get this?" Yes. "Keep reading." The next document was a letter. On Honeywell letterhead. Dated April 2018. "Dear Brandon, I know what you did. The SEC investigation, the fake users, the fraudulent metrics. I know because one of the investors you defrauded, Meridian Capital, is run by my former colleague Thomas Kershaw. He called me asking about your character before considering legal action. I didn't tell him what I'm about to tell you. I've known you were capable of this since you were 23 years old, and I caught you forging my signature on a check. Your mother begged me not to press charges. I loved her, so I didn't. But I've kept documentation of every ethical violation, every questionable business dealing, every corner you've cut over the past 20 years. I'm not going to the authorities. But I'm going to make sure that if anything happens to Margaret, if you ever try to hurt her financially or otherwise, these documents become public. Consider this insurance. Consider this leverage. Consider this a promise. Treat my wife with respect, or I will destroy the reputation you've built on fraud and lies. Your stepfather who never stopped hoping you'd become a better man, Robert." My hands were shaking. He was protecting me. Even then. Robert had been collecting evidence on Brandon for years, Keller said. The SEC report, emails from defrauded partners, testimony from employees who witnessed corporate fraud. He had enough to trigger a federal investigation that would make the SEC settlement look like a parking ticket. Why didn't he use it? Daniel asked. Because he loved Patricia. Because Brandon was Patricia's son, and destroying him would have broken her heart. So he kept it as insurance. Keller gestured to me. For her. Brandon knew about this. Not until after Robert died. He found a reference to a safety deposit box containing relevant documents in Robert's files. He panicked, forged the power of attorney, got the documents, and realized that if the will contest went to trial, if we subpoenaed all of Robert's files, these documents would come out, Daniel finished. Exactly. Brandon wasn't trying to steal your inheritance, Mrs. Chen. He was trying to protect his empire. If this information leaked, his investors would sue. His board would force him out. The SEC would reopen their investigation. He'd lose billions. I felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief that Robert had been innocent, fury that Brandon had put me through hell to cover his own crimes, and something else. Something sharper. "The fake bank statements," I said slowly. He was projecting. Accusing Robert of the exact fraud he'd committed. "Classic deflection," Keller agreed. "Make you look like the villain before anyone looks too closely at him." "So why are you here?" Daniel asked. "Why betray your client?" Keller finished his scotch. "Because I'm 58 years old, and I've spent 30 years building a reputation. I'm not throwing it away for a fraud who's willing to destroy a widow to save his own ass. My firm is withdrawing from the case tomorrow. Brandon can find new representation. And if he releases the fake bank statements anyway?" "Yes." "He won't. Because the moment he does, I'm sending these documents to the Wall Street Journal, the SEC, and every major investor in Mitchell Solutions." Keller stood up. "Mrs. Chen, I'm sorry for my role in this. Robert was a good man who tried to contain a monster. The least I can do is help finish what he started." After he left, Daniel and I sat in that booth for another hour, reading through every document Robert had collected. There were emails from Brandon's employees describing hostile work environment violations. Testimony from a former CTO who'd been forced out after refusing to falsify user data. Documents showing Brandon had used company funds to pay off a sexual harassment claim. Evidence of tax evasion, contract fraud, bribery of local officials to secure zoning permits. Robert had built a case that would bury Brandon completely. "What do you want to do?" Daniel asked finally. "What do you mean?" "These documents. You own them now. You could destroy Brandon's career. Send him to prison probably. Or you could use them the way Robert intended. As leverage. Make him drop the will contest. Leave you alone forever. And go back to his life with this sword hanging over his head." I thought about Brandon's face in that courtroom. The smug smile he'd worn at the funeral. The cruelty in his voice when he'd given me 2 weeks to move out. I thought about Stephanie, crying in my foyer, trapped in a marriage to a man she was afraid of. I thought about Robert, dying slowly, spending his last months not with me but building this case, trying to protect me from beyond the grave. "I want him to know what it feels like," I said. "To be powerless. To be at someone else's mercy. To know that everything he's built could disappear in a moment." Daniel smiled. "I'll draft the agreement." The next morning, Daniel sent a letter to Brandon. Simple. Direct. "Withdraw the will contest immediately. Sign a sworn statement acknowledging Margaret Chen's rightful ownership of all estate assets. Pay $100,000 to cover her legal fees. Never contact her again. In exchange, the documents in Robert Walker's safe deposit box remain private." Brandon responded within 2 hours. "Agreed." The formal withdrawal was filed that afternoon. By 5 p.m. it was over. The house was mine. The accounts were unfrozen. The will would go through probate unopposed. 1. So why did I feel so empty? That night I sat in the backyard. My backyard. Looking at the Camelback Mountain silhouette against the sunset, and I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not sad crying. Not happy crying. Just release. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Hello. Margaret, it's Stephanie." "Hi." I heard Brandon dropped the case. I wanted to say, "Thank you for not destroying him. I know you could have. I didn't do it for him." "I know. But still. Thank you." "I'm leaving him. I filed for divorce this morning. Took the kids to my mother's place in Flagstaff. I can't be married to someone who would do what he did to you. I'm sorry." "Don't be. You freed me. You showed me that you can stand up to bullies, even when they're billionaires." Her voice broke. "He told me you'd never fight back. That you'd take the settlement because you were too weak, too scared. He really believed that. And I believed him. But you proved us both wrong." After she hung up, I poured myself a glass of Robert's favorite whiskey, Lagavulin 16, and toasted the empty chair where he used to sit. "We did it," I whispered to the air. "They didn't win." But the next day brought another surprise. FedEx envelope. No return address. Just a note inside. "You might want this." And a USB drive. I plugged it into Robert's laptop, and a video file opened. It was Robert, but not from the hospital. This was earlier, maybe a week after his diagnosis. He was sitting in this very study, looking tired but determined. "Hi, sweetheart. If you're watching this, it means Brandon tried something. And it means you fought back. I'm so proud of you, Maggie. I always knew you were stronger than you thought you were. But I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you while I was alive, but I was a coward. The documents in the safe deposit box, the evidence against Brandon. I didn't collect it to protect you. I collected it to protect myself. You see, 20 years ago I did something terrible. Patricia was dying. Cancer, just like what's killing me now. And the medical bills were catastrophic. We had insurance, but it wasn't enough. Experimental treatments, clinical trials, specialists. We were going to lose everything. Brandon came to me with an offer. He'd just gotten his first big investor. $10 million from Mitchell Solutions. He said he could give me $500,000, no strings, to pay for Patricia's care. But the money came from fraud. From lying to that investor about his company's metrics. I knew it was fraud. I didn't care. Patricia needed treatment and I took the money. She died anyway. 6 months later. I tried to pay Brandon back. He refused. Said it was a gift, that I'd earned it by raising him. But I knew the truth. He owned me. Every time he committed fraud after that, every time he cut corners or broke laws, he'd remind me that I was complicit. That if he went down, I'd go down with him. So I started collecting evidence. Not to expose him. To protect myself. To make sure that if he ever tried to throw me under the bus, I could take him with me. But then I met you. And I fell in love. And I realized I'd spent 20 years letting guilt and fear control my life. I realized I had to do better. Be better. For you. So I made a choice. I wrote that letter to Brandon. I told him the documents were insurance for you, not for me. I lied. They were always for me. But in my last months, I wanted them to protect the woman I loved more than my own life. Maggie, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you thought I was. I'm sorry I took that money. I'm sorry I kept this secret. But I'm not sorry I loved you. That's the one thing I got right. If you're watching this, you won. You stood up to him. You didn't let him win. And I hope, God, I hope, you can forgive me for not being brave enough to tell you the truth. I love you, Maggie. Always. Robert. The video ended. I sat there for a long time watching the screen fade to black. Robert hadn't been perfect. He'd made a terrible choice, born of love and desperation and fear. He'd kept secrets. He'd protected a man who didn't deserve protection. But he'd also spent his last months trying to make it right. Trying to protect me. Trying to be the man he wished he'd been all along. Could be angry. I could feel betrayed. I could let this revelation poison the 12 years of happiness we'd had. Or I could do what Robert had done. Make a choice to be better going forward. I forgave him. Not immediately. Not that night. But over the days that followed, as I processed everything. The secrets, the guilt, the impossible choices he'd made. I came to understand something profound about love and imperfection. Robert had been human. Flawed, scared, desperate. He'd made a choice that haunted him for 20 years. And in the end, he'd used his final months not to absolve himself, but to protect me. That counted for something. That counted for everything. I saved the video to 3 different hard drives and stored them in different locations. Not because I planned to watch it again. I wasn't sure I could bear to, but because it was Robert's truth and it deserved to be preserved. Then I did something unexpected. I called Brandon. He answered on the first ring. What do you want? To tell you something. And then I never want to speak to you again. Silence. Then. I'm listening. Your mother was dying and Robert took your money. He told me. Everything. The $500,000, the fraud, the guilt he carried for 20 years. Brandon's breath caught. He told you. In a video. Recorded before he died. And here's what I realized. You've spent your entire adult life using that guilt as leverage. Holding it over him. Making him complicit in every crime you committed after that. You turned an act of desperation into a weapon. He didn't have to take the money. No, he didn't. But he did. 'Cause he loved Patricia. Because he would have done anything, even compromise his integrity to save her. That's not weakness, Brandon. That's love. Something you've clearly never understood. Are you done? Almost. I'm not going to expose you. Not because you deserve protection, but because Robert wanted those documents to keep you in check, not destroy you. So here's how this works. You leave me alone. You never mention Robert's name again. You go back to your life and you try, just try to be better than you've been. Because if you don't, if you ever come after me or anyone else I care about, I'll release everything. Not just the SEC documents, not just the fraud, but your full connection to Robert's decision, the money you gave him, the way you manipulated a dying man's guilt. Everyone will know who you really are. You wouldn't. Try me. I hung up before he could respond. The probate process took 4 months. Without Brandon's opposition, it was straightforward. Tedious paperwork, court appearances, asset valuations, but nothing dramatic. By October, everything was settled. The house was fully mine. Robert's investment accounts, worth $1.8 million after taxes, were transferred to my name. His car collection, a 1967 Mustang, a 1972 Corvette, and a Tesla Model S he'd bought on a whim, became mine to do with as I pleased. I sold the Corvette. Kept the Mustang because Robert had loved it. Gave the Tesla to Ashley Morrison, the physical therapist who'd risked everything to tell the truth about Brandon's fraud. I can't accept this, she'd protested when I showed up at her apartment with the title and keys. Yes, you can. You saved me, Ashley. You were brave when you didn't have to be. This is a thank you, she cried, hugged me, and later sent me a photo of her with the car caption. Sometimes good people win. I also paid off her student loans. All $127,000 of them. Anonymous cashier's check, sent through Daniel's office. She'd never know it was me, but I'd know. And that was enough. Cliffhanger number 4. Approximately 8,000 words. But here's the thing about winning. It doesn't feel like you think it will. The house was too big. The nights were too quiet. And I kept wondering if Robert's death had taught me something I wasn't ready to learn yet. Then I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in 12 years. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew about my own past came into question. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late October. I was in the garden, Robert's garden, now my garden, trimming the bougainvillea that the HOA had once complained about. My phone buzzed. California number. Hello, Margaret. It's Marcus. My ex-husband. The man I hadn't spoken to since our divorce was finalized in 2008. The man who'd been feeding information about me to Brandon for cash. What do you want? My voice was ice. I know you know what I did. Brandon told me about the restraining order, about the text Stephanie showed you. And Christ, Margaret, I need to apologize. You sold me out for $20,000. I did. And I've been living with that for months. But that's not why I'm calling. He took a shaky breath. Brandon called me yesterday. He's desperate. His board is turning on him, investors are asking questions, and he thinks you're planning to release those documents from Robert's safe deposit box. I'm not. I know. But he doesn't believe that. And Margaret, he asked me to do something. Something that scared me enough to call you. My stomach clenched. What did he ask? He wanted me to contact your old event planning clients. Tell them you embezzled money, that you were fired for stealing, that you've been running scams for years. He wanted me to destroy your reputation the way you could destroy his. Jesus. I said no. I told him I was done. And then he threatened me. Said he'd make sure my company lost contracts. that he'd spread rumors about my business. Margaret, he's unraveling. I sat down on the garden bench, hand shaking. What do you want me to do about it? I don't know. Warn you, I guess. And maybe give you something. When we were married, you told me about your father. About how he died when you were 19, about how you never got to say goodbye. You told me it was the biggest regret of your life. Marcus, why are you? Because I lied to you. About why we really got divorced. The world seemed to stop. What? You thought I had an affair. With Jennifer from my office. That's what I let you believe. But Margaret, there was no affair. I was in debt. Gambling debt. $300,000 to people who don't take IOUs. And Jennifer was helping me hide it from you because she was my accountant and she was terrified I'd drag her down with me if it came out. I couldn't breathe. You let me think you cheated. Because it was easier than admitting I destroyed our finances. 'Cause I was ashamed. Because I knew if you found out the truth, you'd try to help me, and I couldn't let you drown with me. His voice cracked. So I let you hate me. Let you leave. Let you think I was just another asshole who couldn't keep it in his pants. And you moved on. You found Robert. You were happy. And I told myself I'd done the right thing. You're telling me this now because Brandon's targeting you the way I let him target you. Because I'm tired of being the kind of man who takes the coward's way out. Because you deserve to know that when you left me, it wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because I wasn't. He hung up before I could respond. I sat in that garden for an hour processing. Marcus had lied. My entire understanding of why my first marriage failed, the narrative I'd carried for 15 years, was wrong. I'd thought I'd failed. That I hadn't been attractive enough, attentive enough, good enough to keep my husband faithful. And that belief had colored everything. Had made me doubt myself with Robert at first, made me wonder if I deserved happiness, made me feel like an imposter in my own life. And it had all been a lie. A lie Marcus told to protect me from his own failures. I should have been angry. Should have felt betrayed all over again. But instead I felt lighter. Because the failure hadn't been mine. The inadequacy hadn't been mine. I hadn't been the problem. And if I hadn't been the problem then, maybe I wasn't the problem now. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went out. Not to Costco or the bank or Daniel's office. To a wine bar in Old Town Scottsdale that my friend Linda had been begging me to try. The place was called Postino. Rustic, warm, crowded with people laughing and talking and living their lives. I felt conspicuous at first, a woman alone at the bar. But the bartender was kind and the Pinot Grigio was excellent, and slowly, I started to relax. Is this seat taken? I looked up. The woman was about my age. Silver hair cut in a stylish bob, wearing a turquoise necklace and a warm smile. It's all yours, I said. I'm Joyce. And I have to say, you have the best resting, thoughtful face I've seen in a while. Good thinking or bad thinking? I laughed despite myself. Complicated thinking. The best kind. She ordered a Cabernet, then turned back to me. Let me guess. Recent widow. Blinked. How did you? The ring tan line. You're still wearing it in spirit even though the actual ring is gone. Plus the look. I'm a widow too. 5 years now. It gets easier, but it never gets easy, you know. We talked for 2 hours. Joyce had lost her husband to a heart attack. Sudden, no warning. One day he was mowing the lawn and the next he was gone. She'd been 58. She'd spent a year being angry, another year being sad. And then she'd decided to start living again. Not moving on, she clarified. Living. There's a difference. Moving on suggests you leave them behind. Living means you take them with you but keep going forward. How did you do it? Therapy. A lot of therapy. And I sold the house. Too many memories. Moved to a condo downtown, started taking art classes, joined a book club, said yes to things that scared me. She grinned. Including talking to random women at wine bars. I'm glad you did. Me too. She pulled out her phone. Give me your number. I'm serious about the book club. We meet every other Thursday at Changing Hands. We're reading Louise Erdrich next month. You'd fit right in. I gave her my number. And when I drove home that night, I realized something. I'd spent 6 months fighting. Fighting Brandon, fighting probate, fighting to keep what was mine. But I hadn't spent any time living. Robert would have hated that. The next morning I made a list. Not a to-do list. A living list. Things I want to do. Learn to paint. Robert always said I had an eye for color. Join Joyce's book club. Travel, maybe Italy, maybe Japan, somewhere Robert and I always talked about. Volunteer, the cancer center. Somewhere that helps other widows. Fix up the house the way I want, not the way it's always been. Maybe, eventually, consider dating again. That last one I crossed out immediately. Then I added it back. Then I crossed it out again. Baby steps. I started with number 1. Found an art studio in Phoenix that offered beginner painting classes on Wednesday evenings. Wine and watercolors, they called it. Cheesy but approachable. The teacher was a woman in her 40s named Diane who announced on the first night, "There's no wrong way to do this. If your tree looks like a blob, it's an impressionist blob. Own it." I painted a sunset over Camelback Mountain. It looked like someone had thrown orange and pink paint at a canvas and called it art. Diane loved it. "You're not afraid of color," she said. "That's rare. Most beginners go too safe." I took the painting home and hung it in Robert's study. My study now. It looked ridiculous next to Robert's carefully curated photographs and his aerospace engineering awards. But it was mine. And that mattered. I joined Joyce's book club. The women ranged from 52 to 71. Teachers, lawyers, a retired nurse, a woman who'd run a successful catering business. They welcomed me without prying, asked gentle questions, and when I mentioned I was recently widowed, they nodded with understanding that came from lived experience. "We've all lost someone," one woman said. "Husbands, parents, siblings. Life's admission price to this club is grief. But we're also here to talk about books and drink wine and remember what joy feels like." We discussed Louise Erdrich's The Night Watchman. I'd read it in 3 days, unable to put it down. The conversation ranged from Native American rights to family dynamics to the nature of justice. I contributed hesitantly at first, then more confidently as I realized these women valued insight over credentials. After the meeting, Joyce pulled me aside. "You're good at this. Analysis, I mean. Ever thought about going back to school?" "I'm 62. Isn't that too old? My grandmother got her bachelor's degree at 71. You've got at least 9 years on her." The idea lodged itself in my brain. Going back to school. Studying literature, maybe. Or history. Or even business. Learning things I'd never had time to learn when I was working full-time and building a life with Robert. Cliffhanger number 5. Approximately 10,000 words. But then something happened that reminded me the past doesn't stay buried just because you want it to. Brandon had promised to leave me alone. He'd signed agreements. But billionaires don't like to lose. And what showed up in my mailbox in early November made me realize this story wasn't over. Not even close. The envelope was hand-addressed. No return address. Expensive stationery. Inside was a single piece of paper with a handwritten note. "Margaret, you won. Congratulations. You kept the house, the money, the reputation. You destroyed my marriage. You have evidence that could end my career. You must feel very powerful. But power is a funny thing. Makes you think you're safe. Makes you think the war is over. It's not over. I know things about Robert you don't know. Things that video didn't cover. Things that would make you question everything he told you. And I know things about you. About choices you made before you were the perfect widow everyone thinks you are. I'm not threatening you. Not anymore. I learned that lesson. But I am promising you this. The truth always comes out. And when it does, I'll be watching. Yours in mutual destruction, Brandon." My hand shook as I read it. "Then read it again." Then called Daniel immediately. "He's violating the restraining order," Daniel said. "Any contact is prohibited. This isn't a threat." I don't know what it is. It's intimidation. We're filing a contempt motion tomorrow. Daniel, what if he really does know something? About Robert? About me? Like what? I don't know. But he sounds so certain. Brandon is a con artist. Creating doubt is what he does. Don't let him get in your head. But he was already in my head. Because the truth was, I didn't know everything about Robert. I'd learned about the $500,000, about his complicity in Brandon's early fraud. What else had Robert kept from me? And what about me? What choices had I made that Brandon could weaponize? I spent the evening going through my past with a fine-toothed comb. My marriage to Marcus. Was there something there I'd forgotten? My event planning business. Had I ever cut corners, made questionable decisions? My relationship with Robert. Had I done anything that could be twisted into looking opportunistic? Nothing. Came up with nothing. But the doubt lingered. The contempt hearing was set for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I tried to keep living. Went to my art class. Went to book club. Had coffee with Linda. But I also hired a private investigator named Sarah Chavez. Not to dig up dirt on Brandon. Daniel had already made clear that would be problematic legally. But to investigate me. I want you to find everything, I told her. Every public record, every paper trail. If there's something in my past that someone could use against me, I want to know about it before they do. Sarah looked at me like I was crazy, but she took the job. A week later, she called me to her office in Tempe. She had a folder waiting. Margaret, I've got good news and weird news. Start with weird. You're possibly the most boring person I've ever investigated. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. No lawsuits, no complaints to the Better Business Bureau. Your credit score is 798. You've filed your taxes on time every year since 1985. You're basically a model citizen. I felt relief wash over me. And the good news. The good news is that Brandon Mitchell is apparently counting on you not knowing your own history. Because there's one thing in your past that he might try to use, but it's actually going to make you look better, not worse. She pulled out a document. In 2003, you testified against your former employer, Premier Events of Scottsdale. They were charging clients for services they weren't providing, pocketing deposits, running what was basically a low-level embezzlement scheme. You discovered it, reported it internally, got fired for it, and then testified for the Arizona Attorney General's office. The company folded. The owners went to prison. I'd forgotten about that. It had been traumatic at the time. Losing my job, being blacklisted in the industry for a year, struggling financially. But eventually, I'd started my own small event planning business, rebuilt my reputation, moved forward. Why would Brandon think that makes me look bad? Because he's going to try to spin it. Say you were involved in the fraud, that you only testified to save yourself. But the court documents are clear. You were a whistleblower. You did the right thing at significant personal cost. Can he really spin that? He can try. But anyone who actually reads the case file will see the truth. You were 41 years old, recently divorced from Marcus, barely making ends meet. And you still chose integrity over a paycheck. That's not a scandal. That's character. I drove home feeling slightly better. Brandon could try to dig up dirt, but there wasn't any dirt to find. The contempt hearing was on November 20th. Brandon showed up with a new lawyer, a woman named Patricia Voss from a smaller firm. Keller and Ross had indeed dropped him. Judge Holloway looked even less amused than usual. Mr. Mitchell, this is your second appearance before me regarding harassment of Mrs. Chen. Would you like to explain why you're continuing to contact her despite a clear restraining order? Your Honor, I sent one letter. A private communication that violated the terms of the order. Mr. Mitchell, do you understand what no contact means? Your Honor, with respect, Mrs. Chen is using that order to silence legitimate concerns about. Stop talking. Judge Holloway's voice was sharp. You've already lost the will contest. The estate is settled. Mrs. Chen owns the property. You have no legitimate concerns. What you have is an inability to accept that you lost. Brandon's jaw clenched. I'm extending the restraining order for an additional 3 years. And I'm ordering you to pay Mrs. Chen's legal fees for this hearing. $8,500. If you contact her again, if you send letters, emails, carrier pigeons, smoke signals, anything, I will hold you in contempt and you will spend 30 days in county jail. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Good. Get out of my courtroom. As we left, Brandon's lawyer pulled Daniel aside. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw Daniel's expression darken. When he came back to me, he looked grim. What? He asked. Voss says Brandon wants to settle something. Wants to talk to you directly. Absolutely not. I told her that. But Margaret, she says it's about Robert. About something Brandon genuinely thinks you should know. Something that's not in the documents, not about fraud or money. Something personal. It's a trick. Probably. But what if it's not? I thought about it all through Thanksgiving, which I spent with Joyce and her book club friends, a potluck at someone's house where we ate too much and laughed too loud, and I felt, briefly, like I belonged somewhere again. I thought about it through December, as I painted more terrible sunsets and read Anna Karenina for book club, and started researching master's programs in English literature at ASU. And I kept thinking about Robert's video. About his confession. About the secrets he'd kept. What if there were more? On January 8th, 7 months after Robert's death, I agreed to meet Brandon. One time. In a public place. With Daniel present. We met at the Desert Botanical Garden, on a Wednesday afternoon when the crowds were thin. Brandon looked different. Thinner, older, worn down. Stephanie's divorce was apparently brutal. His board had forced him to step down as CEO, though he remained chairman. The SEC had reopened their investigation. He was losing everything slowly. We sat on a bench near the succulent garden. Daniel stood a few feet away, giving us space but staying close enough to intervene. Thank you for coming, Brandon said. You have 10 minutes. I don't need 10 minutes. He pulled out a photograph. Old, faded, from the 1980s. A young woman with dark hair and a beautiful smile. Do you know who this is? I looked closer. The woman looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. No. That's my mother. Patricia. Before she met Robert. Before cancer. Before everything went wrong. Why are you showing me this? Because you need to understand something about Robert. About why he did what he did. About why he took that money from me. Brandon's voice was quiet, stripped of its usual arrogance. My mother had breast cancer when I was 23. First diagnosis. She beat it. Went into remission for 5 years. Robert was so relieved. They were happy. Really happy. I know this story. You don't know this part. When the cancer came back, stage 4 metastasized, terminal, my mother made Robert promise something. She made him promise he'd take care of me. Make sure I didn't destroy myself with my ambition, my recklessness. She knew I was cutting corners in business. She knew I was headed for disaster. And she begged Robert to watch over me. I felt something cold in my chest. So when you offered him the money, I was testing him. I told him the money was from fraud. I wanted to see if he'd refuse, if he'd turn me in, if he'd choose integrity over Patricia's medical bills. And he didn't. He took the money. And I realized I could control him forever. That he'd always choose Patricia's memory over doing the right thing. That's sick. I know. Brandon's voice cracked. I was 26 years old, desperate to prove I was smart enough to succeed, and I weaponized my dying mother's last wish. I turned Robert's love for her into leverage. And I've spent 20 years using that leverage to get away with everything. Why are you telling me this? Because you won, Margaret. You beat me. And in beating me, you forced me to look at what I've become. At what I did to the only father figure I ever really had. He wiped his eyes. Robert wasn't perfect. But the reason he wasn't perfect, the reason he compromised his integrity, was because he loved my mother so much that he couldn't refuse her dying wish. even when that wish turned me into a monster. I sat there stunned as Brandon stood up. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that Robert's last act, protecting you, building that case against me, that wasn't guilt. That was him finally choosing to do the right thing. Even when it cost him. Even when it meant breaking his promise to Patricia. Why does this matter to me? Because you loved him. And you deserve to know that in the end, he loved you more than his guilt. More than his promises to the past. More than anything. Brandon started walking away, then turned back. I'm leaving Arizona. Probably California. Starting over, if that's even possible at 51. But before I left, I needed you to know. Robert was a good man who made a bad choice. But his last choice, protecting you, that was purely good. He walked away. I sat on that bench for a long time, watching the saguaros cast shadows in the afternoon sun, trying to process what I'd just heard. Daniel sat down next to me. Are you okay? I think so. I think that was his apology. Not for what he did to me. For what he did to Robert. Do you believe him? Yeah, I do. 'Cause it made sense. All of it. Robert's guilt. His inability to stand up to Brandon for 20 years. His final decision to risk everything to protect me. It wasn't about money or pride or revenge. It was about love. About finally choosing love over loyalty to the dead. The spring came to Paradise Valley the way it always does. Gradually, the heat building, the desert blooming with wildflowers that would disappear by May. I'd been a widow for almost a year. The house felt different now. Not empty. Different. I'd repainted the master bedroom. A soft sage green instead of Robert's preferred beige. I'd converted his study into an art studio. Bought an easel and proper supplies. Hung my terrible paintings on the walls like they were masterpieces. I'd enrolled at ASU for the fall semester. English Literature Master's Program. At 63, I'd be one of the oldest students. I couldn't wait. Joyce's book club had become my social anchor. We were reading The Overstory, and arguing passionately about whether Richard Powers had gotten the science right. I'd also started volunteering at the cancer center where Robert had received treatment, helping families navigate the overwhelming logistics of terminal illness. It was hard. Every family reminded me of Robert, of those final months. But it also felt purposeful. Like I was taking the worst experience of my life and transforming it into something that might help someone else. One afternoon in early April, I was leaving the cancer center when I saw her. Stephanie. She was thinner, her hair shorter, wearing jeans and a simple blouse instead of her usual designer clothes. She saw me at the same moment. We both froze. Then she walked over. Hi, she said. Hi. I'm visiting someone. Friend. Ovarian cancer. She looked exhausted. I know you volunteer here. Linda told me. How are you? Divorced. Broke, relatively speaking. Living in a rental in Tempe with my kids. Learning what normal people do for money. She smiled weakly. It's humbling. I'm sorry. Don't be. Best thing that ever happened to me. He paused. Brandon told me about your conversation. At the botanical garden. He said you let him apologize. He needed to. He's doing better. Therapy, actually dealing with his shit. He's working for a startup now. Mid-level position, no executive role. Says it's the first time he's actually enjoyed work instead of seeing it as a battlefield. That's good. Margaret, I wanted to thank you. For not destroying him when you could have. For giving him a chance to become a better person. I didn't do it for him. I know. But still. Thank you. She started to leave, then turned back. Oh, and I'm giving depositions next week. For the SEC investigation. Telling them everything I know about Brandon's fraud. He asked me to. Says it's part of his amends. That'll send him to prison. Maybe. But he says he'd rather go to prison as an honest man than stay free as a fraud. Robert apparently told him something similar once. Took him 20 years to understand it. After she left, I sat in my car for a while, thinking about second chances. About how people can change, even when you think they're irredeemable. About how the most powerful thing you can sometimes do is not destroy someone when you have the chance. Robert had taught me that. Not through his words but through his actions. He could have destroyed Brandon decades ago. He chose to wait, to hope, to give his stepson room to become better. Took 20 years. But in the end maybe it worked. In May, on what would have been Robert's 69th birthday, I did something I'd been planning for months. Threw a party. Not a somber memorial. A celebration. I invited everyone who'd known Robert. His old colleagues from Honeywell, neighbors from Paradise Valley, members of his golf league, my book club friends, Daniel Reeves, Linda, even Ashley Morrison with her Tesla. I hired caterers. Not the fancy ones from Robert's funeral, but a local barbecue place he'd loved. I set up tables in the backyard. I put out photos of Robert through the years. Young Robert at Honeywell, Robert with Patricia, Robert with me, Robert working on his cars, Robert laughing at some joke only he understood. And I told stories. Everyone did. We shared memories, funny and sad and everything in between. Mrs. Henderson told about the time Robert had accidentally flooded his yard trying to fix a sprinkler, and had ended up creating a mud pit that the neighborhood kids used as a slip and slide. Harold Brennan from Honeywell talked about Robert's notorious precision. How he'd measure everything 3 times and drive everyone crazy but never make a mistake. I talked about our first date, about how Robert had tried to impress me by cooking and had set off the smoke alarm making pasta. How we'd ended up ordering pizza and laughing until we cried. He wasn't perfect, I said to the gathered crowd. He made mistakes. He kept secrets. He struggled with things he never told me about. But he loved deeply. He tried to do better. And in the end, he made choices that protected the people he cared about. That's the man I want to remember. People cried. People laughed. And when the sun set over Camelback Mountain, painting the sky in those ridiculous oranges and pinks I'd tried so many times to capture in my terrible paintings, I felt Robert there. Not as a ghost. Not as a presence. But as a memory that had finally become something I could live with instead of something that was drowning me. 2 years after Robert's death, I defended my master's thesis at ASU. The topic: Redemption Narratives in Contemporary American Literature. My advisor said it was some of the most insightful work she'd seen from a graduate student in years. I was 64 years old, and I'd just earned my first graduate degree. Joyce and the entire book club showed up for my defense. They brought champagne and flowers and made such a scene in the hallway that the department chair had to shush them. I didn't care. I'd spent 60 years being appropriate, being quiet, being the woman everyone expected me to be. I was done with that. The house in Paradise Valley sold for $2.1 million. I'd lived there for 14 years, 12 with Robert, 2 as a widow, and it was time to let it go. Too many memories, too much maintenance, too much space for one person. I bought a condo in downtown Phoenix. 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city lights. 1 bedroom for me, 1 converted into an art studio. I could walk to restaurants, to galleries, to the library. I could live a life that was fully mine. Brandon served 18 months in a minimum security federal prison for securities fraud. Stephanie testified against him, but she also visited him every week. They weren't getting back together, she was clear about that, but she said she owed it to her kids to help their father become someone they could be proud of. When he got out, Brandon moved to San Diego and took a job teaching business ethics at San Diego State University. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, including him. He sent me a Christmas card that first year. Just a simple card, no long note. Thank you for teaching me that winning isn't everything. Brandon. I didn't respond. But I kept the card. 3 years after Robert's death, I started dating again. His name was Thomas, he was a retired history professor, and we met at a lecture series on women's suffrage at the Phoenix Art Museum. He was nothing like Robert. Where Robert had been an engineer, precise and methodical, Thomas was a storyteller, full of tangents and enthusiasm. Where Robert had been reserved, Thomas was effusive. Where Robert had been cautious, Thomas jumped in with both feet. On our 3rd date I told him everything. The whole story. Robert's death, Brandon's harassment, the will contest, the secrets, the forgiveness, the rebuilding. That's quite a life you've lived, Thomas said when I finished. Is that a problem? A problem? Margaret, that's the opposite of a problem. That's evidence that you're someone who survives, who fights, who becomes stronger instead of bitter. He reached across the table and took my hand. I'd be honored to be part of the next chapter. We took it slow. I wasn't ready to rush into anything, and Thomas respected that. But gradually, carefully, I let him into my life. Into my condo, into my routines, into my heart. I would never love him the way I loved Robert. That kind of love, first and consuming and transformative, only happens once. But I could love him differently. Love him for who he was, love him for who I was becoming with him. And that was enough. 5 years after Robert's death, I published my first book. It wasn't a novel or a memoir. It was a guide for widows, co-written with 3 other women from my cancer center volunteer group. After the funeral, navigating widowhood, legacies, and new beginnings. Covered everything. The legal stuff, the financial stuff, the emotional stuff. How to deal with predatory family members. How to protect yourself. How to grieve while also building a new life. We sold 15,000 copies in the first year. Got featured in AARP magazine. Started getting emails from women across the country. Women who'd felt alone, who'd been bullied by greedy relatives, who'd thought they were the only ones struggling. "You made me feel less crazy," one woman wrote. "My stepdaughter tried to take everything, and I thought I was being paranoid or difficult. Your book showed me I wasn't alone." That meant more than any bestseller list ever could. The book led to something unexpected. Speaking engagements. Libraries, community centers, senior living facilities, women's groups. I'd stand in front of rooms full of women, and occasionally men, and tell my story. Not all of it. The edited version, the one that focused on resilience and legal protection and finding yourself after loss. But sometimes in the Q&A sessions, someone would ask the harder questions. Do you regret marrying Robert? Knowing what you know now about his secrets? Never. Not for 1 second. Robert gave me 12 years of happiness. His secrets don't erase that. They just make him human. Do you think you'll ever fully forgive Brandon? Forgiveness isn't binary. It's not something you do once and it's done. Some days I've forgiven him completely. Some days I'm still angry about what he put me through. Both things can be true. What would you tell your younger self, the woman who walked into that hospital room the morning Robert died? That question always made me pause. Because the answer mattered. I'd tell her, you're stronger than you think. You're smarter than you believe. And the fact that people underestimate you is your greatest weapon. Use it. The rooms always erupted in applause at that one. 6 years after Robert's death, I got a call from Ashley Morrison. She was getting married, to a nurse she'd met at the cancer center actually, and she wanted me at the wedding. "You changed my life," she said when I protested that I barely knew her. "You gave me a car, you paid off my loans, you showed me that doing the right thing doesn't always mean you lose everything. Margaret, you're the reason I'm not buried in debt. You're the reason I could say yes when Jamie proposed without panicking about money. Please come." I went. Wore a lavender dress, sat in the 3rd row, cried during the vows. At the reception, Ashley pulled me onto the dance floor. "I need to tell you something," she said over the music. "I'm starting a foundation. For medical professionals who blow the whistle on fraud or malpractice. Legal support, financial assistance, counseling. And I'm naming it after Robert. The Robert Walker Integrity Fund." My throat closed up. "Ashley." He made a mistake. But he also spent his last months trying to make it right. And you spent years protecting his reputation while also holding people accountable. That's the legacy I want to honor. Not perfection. Redemption. He would have loved that. I know. That's why I'm doing it. 7 years after Robert's death, Daniel Reeves retired. At his retirement party, held at Durant's, where else, he pulled me aside. "I need to tell you something I probably should have told you years ago. That sounds ominous. It's not. Just, Robert called me 3 days before he died. He was in the hospital, barely coherent, but he insisted I come. And when I got there, he made me promise something. What? He made me promise that if you ever doubted yourself, if you ever felt like you weren't strong enough or smart enough or capable enough, I'd remind you of something. He said, tell Maggie that she was always the strong one. I just gave her permission to see it. I felt tears prick my eyes. He said that. Word for word. And Margaret, he was right. I've been a lawyer for 35 years. I've seen people crumble under less pressure than what Brandon put you through. You didn't just survive. You won. You rebuilt. You thrive. That wasn't Robert's strength. That was always yours. He helped me find it. Maybe. But it was yours to find. 8 years after Robert's death, Brandon reached out again. Not directly, he respected the boundaries by then. Through his daughter, Emily, who was now 22 and studying social work at Berkeley. She sent me an email. Miss Chen, my dad talks about you sometimes. About what happened after Grandpa Robert died. About the mistakes he made. He's different now. Better. And he wanted me to tell you that he's proud of the work you're doing. The book, the speaking, helping other widows. He says you're doing what Grandpa Robert would have wanted. And he says thank you. I know that doesn't erase the past. But I thought you should know. I didn't respond immediately. Let it sit for a few days processing. Then I wrote back. Emily, your father hurt me badly. But people can change. I've seen it. Believe it. Tell him I hope he continues to become the man Robert always believed he could be. And tell him I'm proud of him for trying. She responded within an hour. He's crying. Thank you. 9 years after Robert's death, I turned 71. Thomas threw me a surprise party. Something I'd explicitly told him never to do. And I walked into my condo to find it filled with people from every chapter of my life. Joyce and the book club. Linda and her wife. Ashley and Jamie. Daniel and his partner. Harold Brennan from Honeywell. Mrs. Henderson from Paradise Valley. Students from my occasional guest lectures at ASU. Women I'd met through my widow support work. Even Stephanie showed up with her new boyfriend. A teacher, she told me, who made her laugh and didn't care about money. I hope this is okay, she said nervously. Emily told me about the party and I wanted to see you. To tell you that I'm doing well. That I'm happy. That leaving Brandon was the best decision I ever made. And I couldn't have done it without watching you stand up to him first. I'm glad you came. Me too. She handed me a small wrapped box. This is from Brandon. He wanted you to have it but didn't think you'd want to see him. Opened it. Inside was a photo. Robert and Brandon from years ago. Brandon maybe 25, Robert in his early 50s. They were working on a car together, both covered in grease, both smiling. On the back, in Brandon's handwriting, before I ruined everything. Before I became someone he couldn't be proud of. Thank you for helping me find my way back. B. I put the photo on my bookshelf, next to the pictures of Robert and me. Because that was the thing about forgiveness. It didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing. It meant acknowledging that people were complicated, that damage could be repaired, that even the worst of us could find redemption if we were willing to do the work. 10 years after Robert's death, I stood in front of a room at the Phoenix Public Library, preparing to give what I'd decided would be my last official speaking engagement about widowhood and resilience. I was 72 years old. I had a master's degree, a published book, a partner I loved, a life full of purpose and joy and meaning. I had forgiven the people who'd hurt me. I had honored the man who'd loved me. I had built something entirely my own. I want to tell you about the moment I learned who I really was. I began. It wasn't when my husband died. It wasn't when his stepson tried to destroy me. It wasn't even when I won the legal battle or published my book or rebuilt my life. It was a Tuesday morning about a year after Robert died. I was standing in my kitchen, the kitchen where Brandon had told me I had 2 weeks to get out, and I was making coffee. Just regular coffee, the way I'd made it 10,000 times before. And I realized I was still here. In my house. In my life. Despite everything that had been thrown at me, I was still standing. Not because I was lucky. Not because Robert had protected me, though he had. But because I'd fought. Because I'd refused to be erased. That's when I understood. Strength isn't about never being knocked down. It's about getting up. It's about fighting when you're terrified. It's about building a life from the rubble of the one that was taken from you. I was 62 when my husband died. 62 when I thought my life was over. And you know what? In some ways it was. That life, the one where I was Robert's wife, where I was defined by my relationship to a man I loved, that life ended. But a new life began. A life where I was Margaret Chen, author and speaker and volunteer and student and partner and friend. A life that was messy and complicated and hard-won and entirely, gloriously mine. So if you're sitting here today thinking you're too old, too broken, too beaten down to start over, I'm telling you you're wrong. You're exactly the right age. You have exactly the right scars. And you have exactly the right strength, even if you can't see it yet. Because the woman you're going to become, she's already inside you. Just waiting for you to give her permission to emerge. The applause was thunderous. But I wasn't listening to it. I was looking at the faces in the crowd. Women of all ages, some widows, some not, all of them searching for the same thing I'd searched for in that hospital room 10 years ago. Oh, strength. Permission to become who they were always meant to be. After the talk, a woman approached me. She was maybe 60, with kind eyes and nervous hands. My husband died 6 months ago, she said. His son from his first marriage is contesting the will. He's threatening me, trying to force me out of my home. And I'm so scared. I don't know if I can do this. I took her hands. Looked her in the eye. Yes, you can. And I'm going to help you. Give me your number. I know a lawyer. Because that was the thing about surviving. Once you'd done it, once you'd walked through the fire and come out the other side, you had a responsibility. Not to be perfect. Not to have all the answers. Just to reach back and help the next person through. It's been 12 years since Robert died. I'm 74 now. Thomas and I got married last year. Small ceremony, just friends, at the Desert Botanical Garden where Brandon had finally apologized all those years ago. The Ashley Morrison Robert Walker Integrity Fund has helped 47 whistleblowers stay financially afloat while doing the right thing. Brandon serves on the board. He's still working on his redemption, but he's working on it honestly. Stephanie remarried, the teacher she was dating. They live in Flagstaff and run a non-profit helping women leave abusive relationships. She calls me sometimes just to talk. We're not close exactly, but we're something. Survivors who recognize each other. My book is in its 5th printing. I'm working on a second one, this time fiction. A novel about a woman who discovers her late husband's secrets and has to decide between revenge and redemption. My editor says it's surprisingly nuanced for a debut novel. I'm choosing to take that as a compliment. I still paint. Still terrible at it. Still love it. I still volunteer at the cancer center, though less frequently now. The work is hard on old knees and an older heart. I still miss Robert. Some days more than others. But the missing isn't the crushing weight it used to be. It's just part of me now. Like my silver hair or my laugh lines or the small scar on my hand from the time I burned myself making his favorite roast chicken. Last week I went back to Paradise Valley. Drove past the old house. The new owners have painted it a different color. Sage green actually, like my old bedroom. They've redone the landscaping, added a pool, made it theirs. I didn't feel sad. Felt grateful. Grateful that I'd had that house when I needed it. Grateful that I'd had the strength to let it go. Grateful that it was now someone else's beginning, not my ending. That's the thing about life after loss. It doesn't replace what you had. Doesn't erase who you were. Just adds layers. New chapters. New versions of yourself that coexist with all the old versions. I'm still Robert's widow. Always will be. But I'm also Thomas's wife. I'm an author and a speaker. I'm a volunteer and a student. I'm a friend and a mentor. I'm a survivor and a fighter and, on my best days, someone who helps other people survive and fight too. I'm 74 years old. I have arthritis in my hands and reading glasses on a chain around my neck and opinions about everything. I say what I think. Take up space. I refuse to be diminished. And if you'd told me 12 years ago, that broken, terrified woman in the hospital room, that this is who I'd become, I wouldn't have believed you. But here I am, still standing, still fighting, still building a life worth living. And if I can do it, if a 62-year-old widow who got thrown out at her husband's funeral can rebuild from nothing, then I promise you, so can you. The only question is, are you ready to stop letting other people write your story? Because it's time to pick up the pen yourself. It's time to start writing your own ending. And trust me, it's going to be better than you ever imagined.